Hi, I'm Paul Duchesne, and welcome to Mama Paul's video podcast. The subject for today is going to be microdosing and mindfulness. As a way of introduction, let me say that I wrote this essay, which is available on my website at greenagevideo.com. And I've been thinking about this for a couple of months now, the connection between the two, microdosing and mindfulness. And I sat down, finally, I had a little space. I sat down, I wrote the essay, I finished writing it. And literally, as I finished writing it, within like 2-3 minutes, I suddenly get this tweet from Pollan, who I don't normally ever get tweets from. And he's advertising a new website that they just put together, or rather a piece of a website on Substack that they put together on microdosing. I said, whoa, what a synchronicity. So anyway, that's sort of by way of introduction. By microdosing, what we're talking about is taking very small quantities, very small, diluted, almost diluted quantities of psychedelics, such as LSD or mushrooms, this type of thing. Okay, so basically, what happened was a few years ago, I'm pretty much going to go through the essay that I wrote. A few years ago, at least 5 now, there was a doctor who from the Stanford area, and he got really depressed and almost suicidal. And for one reason or another, he wound up taking some LSD. And as a result of this, he came out of his depression and he sort of turned his whole life around. Well, the report, he wrote a whole big thing about this. And as a result of this, the story made the New York Times, a few other magazines. And within the next year or so, suddenly, Stanford, Harvard, Yale, all the major universities were back experimenting with LSD. And the effects of it, especially in terms of depression and anxiety and this type of thing. Well, spoiler alert, I took LSD in, I think it was 1969, and I had a profound spiritual experience with it. I literally had a really profound, the world dissolved around me, all my ego selves, myself as a father, as a husband, as a worker, as a friend, boom, boom, boom. They all snapped out of me. These sort of roles I had taken on in life all just snapped away from me. And suddenly I became the universe. Everything dissolved, and I felt like I was, this light in the middle of this whole space. But the physicality of things was literally dissolving. It wasn't that they dissolved, but they got very vibrant. They got vibranty, and then colorfully, and then ultimately dissolved into just like a nothingness. It was just me, this light, boom. It was a really profound spiritual experience. Now, the whole experience left me yearning for more. So along the way, I tried it a few more times, lesser quantity, but it was never like the first time, your first experience. And that first experience was also probably the best stuff was around at the time. It was yellow sunshine, which is actually invented and manufactured right here in this town here in Fairfax by Osley, which is sort of an interesting come around in my life. So for years, I was sort of looking to duplicate this kind of an experience. I always had a good time on acid, but I didn't have that kind of really super profound, high spiritual experience. And it wasn't until about 10, I said 10 in the essay, but it was actually closer to 15 years later when I went to my first meditation retreat. Along the way, I'd been exploring all sorts of different kind of yogic things and meditations, one after another. I went through maybe 20 different types of systems. I eventually wound up at a Vipassana meditation retreat. And this is like hardcore Buddhist meditation. It's a 10-day retreat. You're up at 4 in the morning. You're finishing at 9, 10 at night. No food after noon. A little fruit in the evening, 2 meals a day, breakfast and lunch. And you're on the cushion meditating literally 10 solid hours a day in hour increments with maybe an hour of some more instructions at the end of the night. So at the end of the week, you've done like 100 hours on the cushion. It's really a condensed type of a monastic experience, to put it bluntly. And along the way, the first day of the retreat, I'm sitting there and I'm starting to meditate and I'm getting into it a little. And the meditation, it's not It's not the type of thing where you're reciting mantras or anything. It's the kind of thing where you're looking inside at yourself. You're focusing on the breath, and you're becoming aware of the sensations in your body. It's self-awareness directed inside. And once you do that, you start to connect to everything else around. So anyway, I'm sitting there on the cushion, and it's the first day, and maybe, I don't know, third, fourth, fifth hour, I don't remember exactly. But suddenly I get this feeling on my body. And I open my eyes, which you're not supposed to do, and I look down, and my hand is literally, in my mind, dissolving in front of me. It's the same experience I had with the LSD. My mind is dissolving. It's like, whoa, whoa, whoa. This was like unbelievable. I couldn't believe it. I said, wow, I think we're on to something here. So I'm going to take the little riff down there. And Ram Dass, let me put his book up here for a second. I'll throw the book up. Ram Dass, be here now. So that's the famous book by Ram Dass that came out in the late 60s. And I'll put it over my shoulder here. So Ram Dass had been experimenting with Timothy Leary. He had been Richard Alpert. They were both at, I think, Harvard. Timothy Leary went over to the, let's say, more commercial, more fun side of the experience, and Ram Dass got into the more spiritual side of it. Along the way, he has this guru in India that he's going to, and he brings a whole bunch of the acid with him, and he's going to, give it to the guru. He gives it to the guru. The guy drops a whole bunch of it, and it doesn't do anything. Why doesn't it do anything? Because the guy is already enlightened. So this was quite a eye-opener, to say the least. The book here is, I got on the side here also. Let me run over to it. So there's the book over the head, and here physically is the book. That's back in the 60s. It's a real typical kind of 60s book with a lot of graphics in there, and one page. If you really have an interest in this and you want to go back to the roots of be here now, which is what it's about. You're being right here with yourself right this second. So get a copy of the book, and it may just blow your mind. Well, to follow up to the next stage here, Michael Pollan's book is, and let's get that up there for a second. This is Michael Pollan's book, How to Change Your Mind. Now, this book came out a couple of years ago, and it's basically what the new science of psychedelics teaches us about consciousness, dying, addiction, depression, and transcendence. It may be just what we need to get us out of this slide toward authoritarian fascism, is what he says over there. And I've done this a couple of times. I keep putting up the little quote by Fauci, and I'll throw it up again because I have it in the system here. Our society is really totally nuts. Now, the reason I'm following up with this is I just made the statement. It's just what we need to get us out of this slide toward authoritarian fascism. So let's get that down, and we'll get rid of it. And the world seems to be, back over here. The world seems to be upside down, to say the least. I recently returned from a trip back east, and I ran into some of my back east relatives. And I had one relative tell me that Dr. Fauci is I think I said this on the last show, I'll say it again, that Dr. Fauci is like the worst person on the planet. He ought to be shot. Now, this is the guy that's attempting to get us out of this worldwide pandemic using the best science that they come up with. And remember, scientifically, things change every day. So what they say today may change tomorrow because the virus is evolving and changing, just like we're evolving and changing. Everything is evolving and changing. So you can't say something today that's necessarily going to be absolutely the same as it was yesterday, other than the fact of 1 and 1 is 2, that type of thing. But when you're getting into sort of more subtleties, the world is literally upside down. So he's the worst person on the planet, and the other example that I ran into was a lot of these pro-Trump people were repeating these lies and these falsehoods. And if you try to have a discussion with them, which another family member did, one of the saner people, on the social networks, which are, God knows them. So you're on the social network trying to refute their facts. Well, they don't want to hear the facts. They don't want to hear the facts at all. In fact, what they wind up doing is insulting you, denigrating you, and discounting anything that comes out of your mouth as a fact. What's happening is the Republican Party, which has embraced this whole thing, is literally dismantling the democratic system that we have, which isn't exactly the strongest democracy on the planet at all. In fact, prior to Trump, I would have said we were in big trouble. Well, post-Trump, we're in bigger trouble. The Stop the Steal, this continuous threatening poll workers, threatening people that are counting votes, attempting to redistrict. Now, I think in Wisconsin, they're trying to get rid of the bipartisan election commission and replace it with just a bunch of one party. And they want to take criminal action against the people that are opposing them in Wisconsin. I mean, how can you? It's all very, very, very disheartening. It really is. And with this disintegration of democracy, the Citizens United ruling by the Supreme Court a few years ago, which turned corporations into people suddenly, although even though they're people, they can't seem to get arrested, they certainly can't get thrown in jail, and they don't put handcuffs on them and take them anywhere. This is really disheartening, to say the least. Civil servants that I became aware of while I was back east, like policemen and firemen and I'm sure a whole bunch of other groups, were subject to drug testing. So if they smoked a little weed, they would get tested for it, and they would lose their job because they're smoking a little weed. You know, it's really way more dangerous than having 4 shots of alcohol in the middle of the night. Well, LSD is not detectable. Not detectable. Microdosing is not detectable with the tests they have. So what wound up happening is a lot of these civil servants, they would go out to party because, you know, it's like a fraternity. Well, the fraternity guys get together, and the guys are over here, and the wives are over here, because that's what it is. Maybe the one woman in the group over here, you know, and her husband's over there. Well, the wives and husbands are sitting there smoking weed because it's more fun and it's easier and they're used to it. The guys who haven't been doing anything for a long time, suddenly they're starting to microdose because it's starting to come into the mainstream. It's starting to enter the social fabric. Well, I had a couple of conversations with a few of these people post their experiences with some of the microdosing. And these super, literally, racist, xenophobic, sexists, Trumpites, were suddenly getting a little tiny bit more empathetic towards other people. It was, blew my mind. I couldn't believe it. I heard the whole description of how their experience went and what they were going through, and I listened very attentively to the whole thing. And the end result was they felt a little bit better towards some other people than they had before this whole thing. Now, just to be really clear, when you're microdosing like this, you don't wind up into a catatonic state, which you can with LSD. You do a major dose of LSD. You don't want to be walking around the street. You don't want to do it in an uncontrolled environment at all. Even the microdosing, you don't want to do in an uncontrolled environment. But you could wind up literally or feeling like you're in a catatonic state because you could go into a really deep, non-movement kind of place where your mind is expanded and it's not the time to go make bacon and eggs. As simple as that, you know? So you want to be really careful there. Now, the safer method, the most longer-lasting method, is absolutely, unequivocally to do a mindful meditation retreat and embrace the practice. I have a few, in back of me here, I've got Time Magazine, whole issue on mindfulness. Shambhala, Mindful Politics. Mindful Politics, we've got Tim Ryan, better over here. We've got Tim Ryan, Congressman from Ohio. How a simple practice can reduce stress, improve performance, and recapture the American spirit. I'll read a brief sentence from the book here. The most important resource people have for participating in their own health is their natural capacity to pay attention and cultivate awareness, and in a willingness to bring a modicum of kindness and compassion to themselves and others. Systematically cultivating these capacities and making practical use of them in our everyday lives is what mindfulness is all about. I couldn't have put it any better reading it. Mindful Nation, Tim Ryan, Congressman from Ohio, with a foreword by John Kabat-Zinn, who's written quite a bit about mindfulness over the years, done quite a bit of scientific research about it. Bill Clinton is also quoted on the top here. I don't want to go too far with an endorsement for Bill right now, and I wouldn't. But anyway, Mindful Nation, another major contribution. Two others. This is Sandra, the gal who is in the couple of shows on TV recently. Another major book here, Mindfulness, another mindful guide to mindfulness. There's a lot of stuff out there. You can barely get through a week or two of major newspapers without finding something about mindfulness. Over the years, the military has embraced it in order to improve their efficiency. Corporations are embracing it. There's also a commercialization of mindfulness going on, which is something I'll maybe talk about at another time. But as anything starts to enter the mainstream, there's a group there's a commercialization of it is going to start to happen. Just look at what happened with rock and roll and people that were playing free concerts one year, and 5 years later they're in stadiums with thousands of people making millions of dollars. So we got the book, How to Change Your Mind. Over there again. How to Change Your Mind by Michael Pollan. And the interesting experience I had, or personal experience, it was about a couple of years ago. And a friend of mine runs a bookstore, and he had just finished reading the book. And literally within hours after finishing reading the book, a shaman type guy walks into the bookstore. He happens to lead people on psychedelic trips. He offers to do this. They connect. They make a time and a place. They get together, and he goes through the psychedelic trip. He comes out of it, changes his life. He was ready to sell the place and move on and do something else. And we sat down. I sat down with him. We sat down for, oh God, must have been over an hour, chatting about his whole experience and how it affected him. And as a result of that, he stayed around a few more years and made other tweaky changes to his life and was much more in a good state of mind. I'd highly recommend reading the book. Michael Pollan usually wrote about food a lot. He was a food person, and he lives in Berkeley, wrote for the New York Times. You can find him regularly in there. He's got half a dozen books. The Botany of Desire was a big one of his, a lot of big books. Anyway, another one was Nicole Kidman was the star on the series, I think it was on Hulu, called 9 Perfect Strangers. I think it was 6, 7, 8-part series about 2 months ago. I think it was on Hulu, and you can check it out, 9 Perfect Strangers. And it's about these people who come together at this retreat in order to have some self-improvement. And Nicole Kidman is the guru lady that's running the whole show. Well, it turns out she's microdosing them along the way. Now, as this was happening, at the end of the show, they all come out in spite of a lot of weirdness that can happen in the middle of this, because some people going in, you're going to start to, you could start to encounter demons inside yourself. And when these types of things happen, it's always good to have somebody who's not microdosing with you, so that you have a guide who is aware that these things can happen. This can also happen at meditation retreats. I've seen this happen a number of times. People on meditation retreats, they start to go really deep inside, and there's some really deep, ugly, miserable demons inside them. And these things start to surface. So the deeper you go, and remember this, if we are the whole universe, then we are all the good and all the bad. Those are two words that we've created as human beings, good and bad. Animals don't know good from bad. Human beings know good. We've created these concepts. Just like yin and yang, the little yin and the yang, a little yang and the yin. Within within this universe as everything. So going deep inside, good chance you could encounter things that you didn't really want to or weren't expecting. So it's good to have a guide there along the way. I referred to this in the article. I think I used the term heavenly powder, referring to the microdosing. And I just grabbed it out of the air, and it seemed appropriate. Back in the 60s, the LSD, in a sense, fueled the spiritual revolution that was happening. It was the LSD literally that fueled the spiritual revolution. So this psychedelic drug, created here in beautiful downtown Fairfax by Osley, fueled this whole spiritual revolution. Now, some people went one way. A lot of people started going over to India. They started going to Burma. They started exploring the wisdom of the East. Not that it hadn't been there a little bit. It had been there a little bit before that. But the acid definitely supercharged it. Well, the way I'm seeing it, the microdosing could possibly fuel another spiritual, the second spiritual revolution, which is desperately needed now if we are going to evolve, which is something we seriously need to do. We seriously need to evolve, or we are going to destroy the planet, if not shoot each other in a revolution in this country. God knows what's going to happen next. Tristan Harris, you may have seen him. He's been popping in and out of a lot of the talk shows and some of the news shows, and he's actually a quite enlightened individual who is in the middle of the tech world. And he was the guy who was one of the producers of that show about a year ago, the Social Network show, which sort of predates the whole Facebook debacle that's going on right now. He was letting you in this movie, let you know what the hell was going on with Facebook and how they were getting into your life and taking every move you were making and turning it into an opportunity for them to sell you something or have you buy something. So Tristan Harris is out there, and he's actually talking about evolution and us evolving. We, as a race on the planet, the human race, we need to evolve up a little bit, or we are not going to make it. I mean, that's all there is to it. If we don't evolve, we're going to wind up literally destroying ourselves. In which case, the whole planet blows up, and then the whole evolutionary cycle will start all over again. And if you're looking, like I've said this before, if you look at infinity in terms of infinity, how many years is 16 billion years in terms of infinity? Well, 16 billion years might be a drop in the bucket. So we've gotten this far. If things don't go well and we destroy the whole planet, well, boom, the whole thing's over, and we'll probably start all over again. I think it's happened a few times in the past, and if you look deeply enough, you might notice it yourself. So I think we'll leave it at there right now. So you can turn on and tune in without dropping out. So in the 60s, you turned on, tuned in, and dropped out. But in 2020, we're going to turn on, tune in, and drop, and stay where you are. Stay where you are, be aware, and as you become more and more aware that you're connected to everything else, you become more empathetic towards everything else that's out there, and you may start incorporating the golden rule of treating others how you would like to treat yourself, and we can maybe make some progress. That's it. Peace, patience, persistence, and I'll try to follow up with another show next week, Thanksgiving week, and hopefully I can find something to be thankful for. There are a few things to be thankful for, lots of things to be thankful for.